All right, tell you what, let's get started and we'll let folks trickle in as they do. So
Sounds good.
we can keep things to an hour like I usually promise everybody. So welcome. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us today. For those of you who don't know me, and I think there's a couple of you in the audience that don't know who I am. My name is Jeff Kubiak. I'm a professor of practice at ASU, where I serve as the director of future security education in ASU's Future Security Initiative. The educational offerings I help guide include the MA in Global Security, the MAGS, which has a non-technical concentration in cybersecurity and a brand new concentration in irregular warfare. We also offer a graduate certificate in global security and competitive statecraft, and we're building a new portfolio of short courses on similar topics to be offered at ASU's Career and Professional Development educational outlet, Career Catalyst. Today's event is one in a series of events we run each fall and spring to highlight the thought-leading security practitioner faculty that teach in our programs. Tonight's speaker, we're really happy to have Professor Wilson back. Professor Wilson is a retired U.S. Army colonel. He is a professor of practice here at ASU, where he teaches courses in the MA and Global Security on great power competition. He is an International Security Fellow with New America, a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and former president of Joint Special Operations University. He has multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, extensive operational experience, and has published numerous books, chapters, essays, and articles. This talk tonight promises to be a very interesting one. It's titled Overcoming the Perils and Anticipating the Promise of Compound Security Competition, a very powerful framing for the contemporary security environment. Professor Wilson will do a short presentation. Afterwards, I'll moderate a question and answer session. Feel free to submit a question through the Q&A block on your Zoom screen at any time, and I'll do my best to get your question asked. And with that, Ike, the screen is yours.
Outstanding, Jeff. Thank you so much for, as always, a very kind, overly kind introduction. And I want to express my extended gratitude for everyone there at the ASU MAGS program and ASU in general. I want to thank all of you all for taking at least an hour out of your time, out of your busy days, and coming and sharing, participating in what I hope to be a story. I'm going to try to give a story tell, and there are going to be a couple of small minor stories within the larger story tell. But, as Jeff laid out, the title of the talk tonight or this afternoon is very intentional. Overcoming the perils and anticipating the promise of compound security competition. I'm trying to pack a lot into that extended title. There's a soberness and a seriousness to it in terms of accepting the world as it is and recognizing the world as it is and the perils that are of the moment, but also recognizing that we have human agency. Very important for all of us at various points in our life progressions towards becoming those global public affairs professionals. It's all about human agency. And so we have opportunity. We must anticipate and prepare and posture ourselves in new ways so that we're at the right locations, at the right proximate locations and right proximate timings to be able to anticipate the potential promise, opportunities that lie and hide sometimes behind and betwixt and between these perils. And then I want to talk a bit about what we've been talking about globally, certainly in the United States for at least the last 5, maybe closing on 10 years now, this so-called return of great power competition in this emphasis on strategic competition, certainly over the last 3 to 4 years with the 2022 National Defense Strategy, U.S. National Defense Strategy. I don't think it's a return of great power competition because great power competition didn't go anywhere. For the last 20 years or so, we were somewhat focused on and deliberately and understandably so on a very particular part of a larger spectrum of cooperation, competition, conflict in war of all levels and scales, regular and irregular. But great power competition was always there. It was always the undergirding stage. If we think about this as a comedy or a tragedy in the making of a 5-act Shakespearean or Aristotelian story, global affairs is always about a hero's journey and crossing threshold, making threshold crossings into a new and unknown world in search of the elixir to our own times and hopefully getting back to our ordinary world just in time, at least, if not better, to bring the solution to the coming new world that is often through the unknown bringing more to our forward face of perils rather than promise. But promise always there. Again, the human agency thing. So I'm gonna tell a story tonight. I got a script. I've got some pictures that are worth the extra 10,000 words that me, the guy who is cursed with the gift of gab, is not going to have the time to go through. So I've got some PowerPoint pictures, mostly maps, that are going to add that extra narrative. But I'm going to try to do a few things here in a three-part story. The three parts are, we're going to start with where we are today. Part two, we'll transition pretty rapidly into part two. How the heck did we get here, right? Some explanations. And then finally, I'm going to try to leave us with some not only calls to action, but pathways, at least the initial cobblestones towards pathways and laying pathways. Again, the human agency thing, towards pathways towards those promising horizons. Where do we go from here, and how do we do so? Part of that story, that part three, is going to be about grappling with a big question of what does winning and what does victory look like in this new compound security competitive world order and disorder. And therefore, also, what do we need? What does winning and that kind of victory need to get us there? Four big questions are going to be the ties that bind and the threads that go in between this story. Let me just give you all four right up front. I'm a terrible Texas Hold'em card player because I always show my cards. So I'm going to give you the four up front. And depending if I start running out of time and I want to leave time for Q&A and discussion at the end, I'll just cut myself off or rely on Jeff to do so. He knows me very well. He's very good with the hook. What are the four big questions? I think the ultimate big question is, how has the character of global geopolitical and geoeconomic competition changed? How is it changing? Secondly, what are the consequences for future force requirements amid all that change? Thirdly, what does this change mean for the intersection of foreign and domestic affairs? Again, this compounding security dilemma theory of next. And fourthly, what does winning look like, particularly in terms of talent, education, development, and that human agency that I talked about already? I'm going to pull up some slides now, and then we're going to get into it. This has been a quest. We've been trying to schedule this talk since last April. A major storm knocked us out the 3rd of April, to the day last year. Some of the small stories utilizing fictional intelligence and use and utility of fiction. I won't call it useful fiction out of deep respect for my colleagues and friends, August Cole and Peter Singer, who do useful fiction masterfully well and define it and trademark it. But I'm going to try to use some fiction. I have a couple of stories in here I'm going to tell. They were more fiction than fact just 5 months ago. And that's part of the storyline here, interestingly enough. So there's some fiction that's still going to be embedded, but you're going to recognize that what was even only 5 months ago, more fiction than current contemporary fact, has in fact become fact today. In the Game of Thrones kind of metaphor, winter has come. It's not coming, it has come. So let me pull up some slides here, and then we'll get directly into it. Okay, that's who I am. That's the talk tonight. And let's start with where we are. Part one, changing character of global geopolitical competition. Again, we're going to start with that first big question. How has the character of geopolitical competition changed? And what are these, and where are these changes most pronounced? Emphasis on the where. Geography has returned with a vengeance, right? And it matters most, particularly in this compound security competitive world. Why is it happening in most pronounced ways at these very peculiar, historically recurring places and spaces? I want to start with a quick opening vignette, and again, a little bit of useful fiction or utility of fiction and hopefully useful ways. This was crafted a year ago. Some of that fiction is now fact. Now let's suspend some reality here for a moment, and let's open with this story of a world on the edge of compound security. So imagine, if you will, a world that feels more fragile each day, where events in one region spill over into another, creating a cascade of crises that no single nation or alliance can contain. Nowhere is this more evident than today, where at least 6 geopolitical flashpoints, and I'll speak to those here in a few minutes, have converged into a perfect storm of uncertainty. The Middle East burns with a renewed fervor. A localized conflict between Israel and Hamas has spiraled into a broader regional conflagration, drawing in state and non-state actors from across the region. The Iranian-backed militias threaten the oil-rich Gulf, while the flames of instability fan out towards Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Meanwhile, cyber attacks cripple vital infrastructure, choking off oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz, sending shockwaves through global energy markets, affecting economies far beyond the region. But as the Middle East teeters, the Russo-Ukrainian war reaches its third brutal year. What began as a territorial struggle has now metastasized into a grinding attritional war that has reshaped European security. Western nations, exhausted by sanctions and military support, are increasingly divided, while Russia's alignment with China grows tighter. The war in Ukraine is no longer just a European issue. Its effects are rippling outwards, with global food supplies disrupted, energy prices soaring, and NATO's cohesion stretched thin. At the same time, far to the east, the South China Sea, one of the world's most critical maritime arteries, has become a dangerous chessboard for great power competition. Chinese warships and AI-enhanced drones assert dominance, intimidating smaller regional powers, while U.S. naval forces try to maintain freedom of navigation. These waters, once known for their importance to trade, have now become the frontiers of a new Cold War, a place where the threat of conflict looms large, not just for the region, but for the global economy. And as all of this unfolds, we see global maritime insecurity taking center stage. From the pirate-infested waters of the Gulf of Guinea to the increasingly militarized Arctic routes, the world's seas, long thought of as international commons, are becoming contested spaces. Commercial shipping, which underpins global trade, is under threat from cyber attacks, piracy, and the potential weaponization of vital choke points like the Suez Canal and Panama Canal. We stand at a moment where the stability of global trade routes is no longer a given, but a question mark, a geopolitical uncertainty that threatens economies worldwide. These events, while seemingly distinct, are not isolated crises. They are interconnected, compounding and amplifying one another in ways that make traditional solutions less and less effective. I might say ineffective. What happens in the Middle East destabilizes energy markets and global supply chains. The Russia-Ukraine war strains alliances and military resources needed elsewhere. The South China Sea becomes a powder keg for a global power struggle. And all of this happens while global maritime insecurity jeopardizes the very arteries of international commerce. Folks, this is compound security competition. A world where challenges converge, overlap, and create new wicked problems that defy single-issue solutions. In today's global security environment, we no longer have the luxury of viewing conflicts in isolation. Instead, we must understand that these crises are interlinked, each feeding off the other, creating a new kind of complexity that demands equally complex solutions. So going deeper into part one, where are we in this notion of the end of history has ended, winter has come. Press to summarize, perhaps, today's global security environment is marked by contagious, converging, trans-regional threats and a weakening of traditional nation states. The paradox is this: by treating these threats as isolated issues, we worsen the problems, increasing their complexity and scale. Now let's enlarge the context a bit. Let's start with what we know. Sorry about that. Let me go back here for a second. For instance, Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping are seen as a local problem or can be seen and approached locally. However, we must zoom out as well. Imagine a world, say, in 2028, where cyber attacks in the Strait of Hormuz and drone strikes in the Suez Canal disrupt global trade. Imagine, in a tension-gripped year of 2028, the world inches towards a novel kind of warfare, one that sprawls across the arteries of international trade, the maritime choke points. In the Strait of Hormuz, an insidious cyber onslaught disrupts the flow of oil, sending the United States and China into a scramble of military posturing and peace brokering. A drone strike targeting a vessel in the Suez Canal escalates tensions, with fingers pointing across Chinese military towards Chinese military strategists, compelling the U.S. to strengthen its Mediterranean fleet and Russia to show off its naval capabilities in response. In the South China Sea, Chinese AI drones aggressively assert dominance, intimidating neighboring nations with a fraught dance of diplomacy and deterrence. The Panama Canal, too, falls prey to cyber interference, triggering delays that highlight the influence of Russian digital operatives in stretching American naval defenses. Dramatically altering the naval chessboard, Russia and China joined forces to pioneer the Northern Sea Route. Again, this is useful fiction here, proposing an alternative to the conventional maritime corridors dominated by Western powers and introducing a bold challenge to the status quo. Now, even as the Black Sea burgeons with tensions in Brazil's southern ports enter the stage as geopolitical prizes, the consequences of disrupted global commerce are felt worldwide, from soaring costs to shattered economies. With the international community in tumult, the UN convenes to address the shattering potential of widespread conflict. Secretive diplomatic endeavors aim to forge a semblance of agreement, yet the enduring undercurrent of rivalry casts a long shadow over the future of international maritime law and the collective hope of enduring peace. This enlarged storyline, a useful fiction I published last year, titled The Battle of the Straits, a Geopolitical Maelstrom, unravels across several strategic locations. This kind of imagined future story captures the real-world implications of these clashes, that being disrupted supply chains, skyrocketing costs of trade, and an ever-complicating global political matrix of alliances and enmities. As nations grapple with these emerging threats, the narrative explores the repercussions for local economies, marking a stark rise in regional tensions and an accelerating arms race. This Battle of the Straits ends as a stark allegory for the potential crises that might arise from the world's growing geopolitical fissures, where the all-too-real game of nations plays out in the waters that carry the lifeblood of global trade. Now, unfortunately, the stark allegory told as a useful fiction is now largely an actuality of a world where the stability, security, and prosperities of the global maritime commons are now rapidly becoming a deadly uncommons. Future security, prosperity, and profits lie in the balance of winning this bigger map's larger war, a war already begun. Most importantly, doing so in preventative ways that can achieve wins, preferably, ideally without fighting, anticipatorily. To defeat this paradox at the center of this compound security dilemma, we must remember and then begin to act anew upon the words of the famed diplomat Jean Monnet, when Jean Monnet said, quote, "When faced with an intractable problem, seek to enlarge the context. Doing so expands the possibilities frontiers." And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about in the remaining time tonight. So let's look a bit at the challenges of today's global security environment. Okay. War is once again on the rise, but our traditional methods of planning and response are inadequate. The International Institute for Strategic Studies highlighted this in their annual conflict survey last year, noting a disturbing disconnect between the perception and reality of modern security dilemmas. This survey highlighted a paradoxical global security landscape, where a popular sense of an intractability of crises coexists with a condition of unsober and unseriousness in realizing and coping with the full gravity of today's security dilemmas. As historian Max Hastings further noted in notes, quote, "One of the primary reasons Europe went to war in 1914 is that none of the big players were as frightened as they should have been of conflict as a supreme human catastrophe. After a century in which the continent had experienced only limited wars, from which Prussia had been an especially conspicuous profiter, too many statesmen viewed war as a usable instrument of policy. which proved a catastrophic misjudgment. Now, again, we are witnessing a shift in global behavior that threatens the stability of the United States, its allies, and the broader Western liberal order. This change, while often portrayed as a domestic political issue, such as the immigration debate at the U.S. southern border, has far-reaching global implications. The political gridlock within the U.S. Congress has not only stalled immigration reform, but has compounded larger global security challenges. All of these other 6 major compound security dilemmas worldwide, in many respects, and again, I'll go back to one, largely converging in compounding at or near the southern border of not only the United States of America as a single nation state in a global community of democratic national statehoods, but importantly, at the southern border of the current, for good, bad, and ugly or indifferent, the current global leading power, the hegemon, the United States of America. So consequences for all others, for the globe itself, for the Western liberal international world order or disorder itself writ large. Okay. So part 2, how the heck did we get here? And my apologies to the wonderful band Coldplay, but I've a long time been haunted by this stanza in one of their great songs. Am I part of the cure? Are we part of the cure, or are we part of the disease in terms of this compound security competition? Again, we must never forget there are some existential things and some things that happen by the nature of things. However, we bring human agency to the world that we live in, right? And therefore, from a constructivist standpoint, the times are signs of our times. So we must take, as we point fingers out to natural and not so natural dilemmas, we at least have to recognize the 3 fingers pointing back to our collective selves, right? There is peril there, but importantly, there is promise and opportunity there as well. Okay, good. Okay, how do we get here? This is not a new phenomenon, it's important to say, but the result of long-term transitions in global power dynamics. Traditional security concerns like resource control are now inextricably linked with human security issues like food shortages and migration, just to name a couple. What is compound security? The concept of compound security, simply put, reflects this interconnectedness of modern threats, this intersectionality of threats. Today, the division between national and international concerns is blurred, to say the least. Energy policy, immigration, the global health are no longer just domestic issues, but global security challenges. We have to approach them as such. Let's talk a little bit about the geography of compound threats. Global threats demand global solutions. Compound threats demand equal to overmatching compound approaches to solve. Just focusing on U.S. forces for a moment, U.S. forces are overstretched and imbalanced, and the contagion of compound security threats grows faster than we can respond. And that's the hegemon that we're talking about, right? To address this, we need global integrated strategies. So then, part 3, where do we go from here and how? And again, reflections of Jean Monnet. When faced with what seems an unsolvable problem or problem set, seek to enlarge the context and expand the possibility frontier. The 2022 National Defense Strategy recognizes the need to deter kinetic and non-kinetic threats to the homelands of the United States and its allies from Xi's China and Putin's Russia, predominantly so. A major focus of the Department of Defense strategy is investing in resilience, the ability to withstand, fight through, and recover quickly from disruption. In other words, to strengthen deterrence. To cope with the complexity of social ecological systems, many researchers essentially invoke the first law of geography. That being, everything is related to everything else, but here's the important part. But near things are more related than distant things. Our challenge then, under conditions of compound security competition, I would offer, is to make what we traditionally have made distant things. For example, root human security grievances of local, typically global South stakeholders, to make those near things to the global North. We might aim to do this in at least two ways. First, towards offering a solution, thinking about and approaching these puzzles through polycentric approaches. Now, the United States National Defense Strategy calls for resilience to withstand and recover from disruptions again. To do this, we must bring distant issues again, such as local human security grievances, closer to the forefront of global security planning. One way to address this is through polycentric approaches, which target vulnerabilities in key geostrategic nexus locations. Now, I find the concept of polycentricity very promising here. Polycentric arrangements demonstrate characteristics of order. Researchers working across the globe, specifically in places like Latin America, West Africa, and elsewhere, have successfully applied polycentric concepts of vulnerability and resilience by mapping where indicators of exposure to hazards, poor infrastructure, underdeveloped markets, or weak governance overlap, where those things overlap. Compound security threats tend to recur in the same locations over time. However, of all these researchers, what I've found is very few, if any of these researchers, have explicitly, emphasis on explicitly, investigated the use of societal resilience and vulnerability indicators for geo-targeting deterrence treatments, interventions against political and economic coercion by the likes of, say, Xi's China, of Putin's Russia, and others. Let's talk a little bit about this second piece, what we call distributed deterrence. We must shift toward distributed deterrence, enabling United States allies to defend their territories while maintaining a degree of their own strategic autonomy. This will complicate adversarial actions. It has the promise, at least, of complicating adversarial actions and also reassuring our allies of our commitment. Now, I want to reflect back on the 2021 Interim National Security Strategic Guidance, the INSG, published in May of 2021 by the Biden administration. It spoke and still speaks to, quote, an intersectionality of threats, compound security, folks, that is demonstrative of a global security environment characterized by convergent, trans-regional compound security threats. Additionally, and importantly, in a geostrategic sense, these compound threats are increasingly converging at very specific key geostrategic nexus locations. This slide, emphasis on unclassified. Typically, when I show this slide, it makes folks like I was when I was a soldier once and young very uncomfortable because it starts to look like an OPSEC problem. This is all open source, 18 to 20 locations. The yellow dots show not only the key nodes of Xi's China's Belt and Road Initiative, but those yellow dots, those key nodes, are not only particular to Xi's Belt and Road, but they're the same or proximate to the same locations that define the key nodes of the Silk Road for Alexander the Great, for the British Empire, both rounds of their excursions, et cetera, et cetera. These are historically recurring locations. Those red oval places, fault line confrontation, gray zone nexus locations. These are the places that historically, cyclically, good, bad, and ugly things tend to converge naturally and by human agency, converge at these locations, and that's where you get the wicked problem dynamic, the compounding effect. Imagine, if you will, us rethinking posture, preparedness, force, packaging at or proximate to these locations, a reconsideration of enduring allies and anchoring partners at or proximate to these locations. Folks, this is what I call the commanding heights model, and it provides opportunity for anticipatory and perspective checkmating asymmetric positional advantages. Doesn't mean that there's still not competition, conflict, and potential war to be had, fought in one, but it does put you in a position to actually checkmate your adversary in a grand strategic sense of the terms. Can't emphasize that enough. Okay, these locations are, again, historically relevant and recurring locales, fault line confrontation, gray zones. And they are not only consequential to the regional and global balances of power, but they're important to command and control and influence at or proximate to these key locations. Doing so confers significant positional advantages to actors in both competition and war. Of geostrategic importance, many of these nexus locations are mirrored in the current and planned nodes of the land and maritime corridors of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Okay, already talked about that. Additionally, many of these nexus locations are already revealing themselves as the primal locales, once again today, as in the past, of great power state collisions. According to historian Walter Russell Mead, sometime in 2013, we reached a new stage in world history. A coalition of great powers has long sought to overturn the post-Cold War Eurasian settlement that the United States and its allies imposed after 1990. In the second half of 2013, that coalition began to gain ground. The big three challengers, Russia, China, and Iran, all hate, fear, and resent the current state of Eurasia. Increasingly, they think they have found a way to challenge and ultimately to change the way global politics works. Folks, that was 2013. We are living this today. Experienced U.S. military strategists have emphasized that what is missing in traditional deterrence is a more comprehensive integrative approach, one capable of addressing intersectional puzzles, and as such, addresses the use of societal resilience to deter, deny competitors, and especially in the proverbial gray zones. A new internecine space and environment where China and Russia, as well as other regional and trans-regional state and non-state actors, are rapidly advancing their interests through coercion and subversion rather than unambiguous threats. Today's compound security competitions play out at the nexes of these intersectionalized threats as compound security threats. And as such, they reveal the limitations of single-factor analytics, both in terms of force requirements, as well as risk mitigation calculations, right? And their call for and promotion of unilateral treatments. Under these conditions, at least for me, it raises the very sober question of whether unilateralism is a solving approach. Unilateral uses of force and power certainly can get you into these protracted puzzles, but increasingly, at least as I argue, very difficult to solve. Putting you and the power and the allies and the partnerships in a position of what I like to call a position of out of balance position of too little, too late for not long enough. Being only able to bring so much force to power purpose, too little, typically late incoming, the problem already metastasized and contaged, and therefore a rapid accelerative dwindling of political will and resources available, lending towards that inability or unwillingness, a combination of both, to stay the contest and the competition and the conflict to a completion. Okay. To counter the threats posed by adversaries like China and Russia, we need to maintain our technological edge. We do this by achieving integrated deterrence through leveraging technological power, or technology power, as a strategic advantage. Free markets, innovation, and competition should inform our strategy for preserving this advantage. I would put one caveat to this leveraging of technological power, a mainstay of the Western and American way of peace and warfare, with a caveat, and I'll call it the hero caveat. We need to take an advantage and leverage, as we've always done, technological power and our technological innovative acumen, but I would offer we need to do so in a hero approach. What do I mean by that? Measured and mitigated human agency and control of regulating that technological power through highly educated, hyper-technological talent and teaming enabled responsible operations or hero, right? Okay. Let's see where I want to go next. Let's talk a little bit about strategic implications. And again, emphasis on key terrain. You can see subdued here, Mackinder's World Island. We still live on it. And look at that pivot of geopolitical history. Look at what's happening today in the world, particularly across the greater Middle East. Seven-front war. That was only 2-3 weeks ago, a two-front war, if that was not bad enough in terms of Israel-Hamas. Now, upwards of 6 to 7 frontages, and with more contagion potentialities, if not promise, forthcoming. All at or approximate to that historically recurrent pivot of geopolitical history that Sir Halford Mackinder talked to us about way back in 1904, right? There and back again. We must strengthen alliances, apply polycentric strategies, and address compound threats at key geostrategic locations, at or approximate to those hinge points, right? Success will require integrated statecraft that combines diplomacy, defense, development, and commercial solutions, what I like to call 3D plus C. Now, given today's unfolding events across the Eurasian heartland, it is time, long overdue, in fact, to recapitulate the geopolitics theory of Sir Halford Mackinder and other geopolitical theorists and historians in the significance for contemporary events. In contemporary events to rediscover, in order to rediscover what might be learned from this grand strategy, right? For applications to national defense strategy campaigning. Observers today have noted how the Belt and Road, again, reinforce and parallel this connectivity, setting the condition for a great game at the classic Mackinder strategic heartland in contemporary times. What you're seeing here on the slide is, in an unclassed rendering, some of the work that we were doing at United States Special Operations Command. The command, I understand, is continuing to move forward in what we regarded as a multi-rings approach. Imagine that other previous blue slide with all the nodes and the fault line confrontation zones. Imagine at each of those confrontation zones, using that as the bullseye, if you will, of the ring approach, and then working from the 10-ring centerpiece at or approximate to those nodes of interest in importance, and working your way out for off-axis, not only on-axis, but also at the same time, simultaneity towards off-axis applications in an anticipatory and perspective, advantageous positional placement and posture for applications, simultaneity in practice. In terms of what winning looks like, this is a way, not the way, but a way, an idea of achieving integrated deterrence through asymmetrical positional advantage, again, through a blended mix of both not only negative aims, but more importantly, positive aims, operations, activities, actions, and investments. Okay, starting to round out here. What is of particular importance here is, again, I can't emphasize this enough, the geography of conflict endures. It matters most in most perilous, but also in most promising opportunities, giving rise to strategic intuition that informs geopolitical thought. By scouting compound security threats and gray zones at peculiarly key commanding heights, geostrategic nodes and fault lines, in increasingly outside of China's or Russia's direct spheres of influence, beyond the historical near abroads, in locations like Latin America, Africa, and across the Middle East, or South Asia writ large, the joint force in the United States government and our enduring allies and anchor partners can target very specifically and precisely deterrence treatments among state and non-state societal actors to increase societal resilience, reduce vulnerability, and offer an advantageous strategic position, again, at or approximate to those commanding heights, the geoeconomic and geopolitical commanding heights. This in turn will deter, or has the promise of increasingly deterring China and Russia and others, exponentially so, I would offer, and where it counts the most, by making coercive actions X times more difficult and costly. Again, leverage and advantage the off-axis activities, operations activities, and investments, making them more difficult and costly. as well as reassuring allies and partners of the continued United States commitment to their national defense as part of our collective security. This then begins to speak towards a different form of deterrence, distributed deterrence, as an enhanced form of traditional deterrence, tailored specifically to the unique aspects and requirements of today's active deterrent challenges under conditions, again, of compound security competition. The essence of distributed deterrence lies in providing allies of the United States with the capability and the capacity not only to defend their own territory, but also to engage in muscular, if and when required, and where, in muscular reprisals and conventional escalation without the United States being a direct part of the tactical decision loop. If one were to assess the emergent security landscape in the Indo-Pacific, for example, let me move forward here for a second. New security arrangements represent a polycentric structure for this kind of collective security. While this structure is different than what is seen in the transatlantic community with NATO, it may create similar strategic effects. So again, emphasis on polycentricity. Now, the joint force, often leading integrated formations, can deliver strategic impact by focusing on key geostrategic locations where threats intersect, requiring collaborative statecraft solutions involving allies and partners. Let me give you a quick example. Countering China's illegal resource extraction is a perfect case of compound security, where local actions have global consequences. For example, traditional responses to future conflicts over food, fish, climate could bring unprecedented risk, especially in under-governed maritime regions where adversaries exploit those resources, trafficking in everything from narcotics to weapons. Small-scale special operations forces engagements supported by AI and data analytics have enabled Global South law enforcement to seize illegally caught fish and disrupt criminal networks. By modernizing policy for greater unity and collaboration across military, diplomatic, and commercial efforts, the United States and its partners can build resilience and sustainable economic growth on the global scale. Furthermore, the U.S., as a bridge builder between security communities, should push for NATO adjustments to include, in my not so humble opinion, global partners, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. NATO's 2022 Futures in the Indo-Pacific initiative represents a critical step towards that kind of deeper collaboration and integrated deterrent strategies to address compound threats in key regions. Folks, let me begin to end here with just this, a call to action. And again, a call to action that at least tries to lay some cobblestones towards a set of plans of action. This is a call to action and planning for action. What does winning or victory look like in this world of compound security competition? And what does winning need to succeed? I believe those two questions are the operative ones as we move forward towards converting calls to actions and intentions to act in new and more promising ways, but to roll up sleeves and actually get on towards the doing. We need integrated intervention solutions that address the full scope of compound security challenges. Only through collaboration, foresight, and strategic action can we achieve lasting security and prosperity. Folks, I think I've left us with 15 minutes. I want to put a shameless marketing plug out. You know, I've talked a lot tonight about compound security. I'm doing a lot of continued writing. I've been working on this as a theory of next and compound security competition as a application methodology. The former for over 3 decades with experimentations under fire and across the CENTCOM region, as well as with special operations forces in terms of campaign plan for global SOF operations worldwide. I'm doing a lot of writing and on the subject as well, and just launched on the 30th of September a new Substack newsletter called Compound Security Unlocked. It's free and will remain free. And you can see from the slide the mission, the content pillars, and content offerings. Monthly newsletter with 3 or 4 pieces offered, and an opportunity for us to dialogue, and most importantly, quote, build a community of thinkers, policymakers, and engaged citizens committed to calls to action, hearing the call to action, and moving forward collectively together towards laying out overmatching compound security plans of action. With that, I'll come out of a whole defilade here in the slide presentation and present myself for questions and Barb's and the throwing of rotten fruit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ike. That was an amazing discourse. It was a trip. In fact, a real odyssey, quite frankly, from covering the broad scope of where we are was just enough to bend my mind. For the audience members, if you've got a question, pop it in the Q&A block, and I'll try to paraphrase it and get it answered for you. But I've got several questions, Ike, as you might have imagined as we started this conversation. So first of all, I appreciate the fact that you went from kind of where we are to, an objective overview of kind of where the globe is in the compound security setting, to something that resembled, ways forward for the U.S., if you will, and for structure and approaches and that sort of thing. And I got that. It was actually the first part that intrigued me, and it raised a number of questions in my mind. One, as you mentioned, the year 2028, which, judging from the fact that some of these stories you started telling were only 5 months old and they're now real,
Crazy.
Is 2028 too far into the future? Should we not be looking maybe a little closer?
Jeff, 100%, 100%. I went back and forth and puzzled, and even while I was telling the vignette, I was still in my own trauma.
Yeah,
I went back and forth over several days, whether or not I wanted to update the vignette. I finally landed, obviously, on leaving the vignette as they were. And again, the couple that I laid out, I had laid these out a year ago. 2028 is here. Again, winter has come. I wanted to leave the stories as they were because some things in there, some of the cyber pieces, particularly the AI-enabled drone pieces, some of it not taking place, but some of it not taking places in certain places.
Or we haven't seen it yet, or aren't aware of it yet, right?
So we're not aware of it yet. It's happening, but we haven't recognized it yet. And that's the thing. There's an enormous business lag, right? Borrowing from economics, there's an enormous business lag to all of this. And the accelerations, business lags always existed, but the accelerative aspect of these policy and business lags makes it all the more imperative for us to do our best collective multilateral, multinational approaches, multilateral, beyond nation states, beyond government. Created GIMC, whole of government, whole society. It really puts texture to that rhetoric, right? Nothing but that will solve. How to do that in an organized manner? I think there's a lot of hope in taking what we do very well across the 3D communities of defense, development, and diplomacy at ground, local level, particularly in the military, with joint interagency task forces, right? Case in point, the McChrystal model of network, takes a network to take down a network, take that to scale. And I think that's exactly the kind of apparatuses that we need to be experimenting with, doing scenario-based gaming to include wargaming, but not limited to wargaming. We need to do competition gaming at or approximate to a map similar to, if not the same as what I showed in terms of that nodal map. And focus on those locations. I'll pause there. But
that's an interesting point, and I think, and that's because you basically just summed up because your discussion about where kind of the approach to this complexity that the global security environment presents to us today, and the compound security competition. This whole idea of polycentric governance, I thought, was a phrase I had not really heard before, and I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. So a polycentric approach makes sense to me in a complex system. That makes sense, but polycentric governance was a puzzle to me. Who are the agents that allow us to arrive at polycentric governance besides states? Because you already told me states are weakening, and we're not going to have the capability to act as agents, even though we have agencies still. They're not the same as they were. Who are the other agents?
I think it's a great question and an uncomfortable one for traditionalists in terms of nations and states, national states, maintaining that quote unquote monopoly on the instruments of force for power purposes, particularly military force. Monopoly, you maintain the monopoly on the instruments of violence. We want that to stay with states, right? And luckily, we still live in a world where nation states, statehoods, maybe maybe,
Yeah.
I'm in a good mood tonight. Yeah, who knows, right? Um, are still the primary actor, but to say under challenge is
Yeah.
an understatement. I think the uncomfortable part of all that is we have to almost become the constructivists again. Um, Structured constructivists, if you will, that kind of a hybridization, and rethink these models.
Hmm.
And that's where I get a lot of utility from, Peter Singer's and August Cole's use and utility of fictional intelligence and useful fiction. It helps you paint a around the corner, not science fiction, but an around the corner reality where I can start to think about the technologies that are there or right on leading edge, tactics and techniques and procedures, governmental and non-governmental both,
Right.
right on the leading edge, right? Edge
Yeah.
everything, but not fantastical, where it doesn't become realistic. It loses its relevant reality. Useful fiction, therefore. And use that to paint a picture, kind of like what I tried to do with the two vignettes, to paint approximate future picture that would allow us to realize a couple of things. Primarily, the current model is necessary, is still necessary, but insufficient. And then it
Yeah.
might put us the traditionalists in us in a position where we think about different command relationships. I'll use military language here: command relationships, support and supporting
Right.
relationships,
Yeah.
where diplomacy and where development and maybe non-governmental organizations, even private governmental organizations that are deeply rooted at the underlying current levels in these local proximate zones, embedded with the people, where we follow and support their lead. Very difficult, very difficult in our model. It's not something,
Right.
it's contrary to our model, but I think that's there's promise there. I think that's what's required.
Yeah, we got to go there. In fact, one of our colleagues is in the audience, and she's actually a scholar on this on economics and security, and is writing about even individual agents within the globalized economy are
Yes,
having geostrategic effect in ways that we don't really see, largely because we're not looking for it. We don't. It exists. It's out there. We don't understand it as part of this puzzle because we don't look for it because our paradigm is too small. It's too narrow. And this is where I really appreciate the compound security complex that you discussed. The other piece I wanted to bring up was, all
yeah.
right, so the environment that we're operating in is changing as well, pretty radically and rapidly, right? I mean, even if it's not just AI and cyber and the technology piece, but
Yeah.
literally the environment is changing, right? As
Yes.
as witnessed by the United States here recently in
Unbelievable.
very stark ways, right? The most
Hmm.
deadly storm since Katrina
Exactly.
has taken its toll on the U.S. And that's not the end of it, right? We're going to see a lot more of those sorts of things. How are those things shaping the approach that agents within the system have to do when thinking through security?
I think I would offer this is one of the most important, at least in my view, this is one of the most important aspects, governing dynamics, if you will, of this theory of next of compound security, and in the methodological apparatus of compound security competition. Um, that every policy issue has a security aspect to it. So our notions, when I say security and defense, typically you
Mhm.
think of physical action, lethal use of, typically in the military. We might extend that. We might be willing cognitively to expand that from military to first responder type of agents and agency. We've got to expand that much more broadly so
Mhm.
that we can understand that the not only the man-made um, threats and activities that challenge status quo, but the environmental, that the environment itself
Right.
gets a vote. We always have that moniker of the enemy always gets a vote, the adversary, the competitor always gets a vote. The environment gets a vote, and the environment is voting dramatically right now. So
Mhm.
we've got to get our minds around every traditional domestic policy issue. And I started doing this, gosh, 20 years ago, when I was asked to give a talk to the National War College. And I started experimenting with these different kinds of maps. And I was looking at the domestic policies of, say, health policy. Traditionally, we think of health policy very, very much within contained within the domestic spheres of territorial states, right? But what we're really living with and experiencing and have been for a long time, though we haven't recognized it as such and changed our treatment regimens accordingly, is global health security, immigration policy. We're talking about migration, immigration security policy. So we need to expand our understanding and our approaches, therefore, to what constitutes a security dilemma. We've got to go deeper local, and at the same time, we've got to go extraterrestrial, all at the same time. And this is one of the reasons why the algorithm, the power equation, will not equate under those kinds of those accordion dynamics that are going on. The power equation, Newton, we only have to understand the Newtonian power equation. Power equals force times displacement, how you use force and where, and that's why I emphasize the commanding heights model over time, right? Right now, the power equation is not equating, and that's part of what drives the wickedness of the wicked problem and the frustrations of intervening forces like the United States in the global north. We're applying the same force in the same ways at the same places, and it seems not only to solve less and less, but it seems to piss off the problem. Right? The problem,
absolutely.
Right? These are the dynamics, the paradox of compound security. Yeah.
I completely, you and I know this too, right? You and I resonate on this idea. I think it's really, I'm really happy you brought up the term extraterrestrial though just now, because I really like that idea. And it actually brings me back in my mind to the role of who has agency. It strikes me that the Ukraine war is a tremendous example of this, because a single individual can decide whether or not Ukraine can talk. The Ukrainian forces can talk to each other, which is absolutely mind-bending, right? Because it's not a state. So when you talk about polycentric governance, don't you have to include Elon?
Absolutely. That's the other thing that keeps me up at night, right? Because we have to include all the actors in these super empowered individuals. Strong men are not only governmental leaders.
Yeah,
right. The authoritarian challenge is not only coming from within traditional apparatuses for voting in of those powers. It comes from super empowered individuals like an Elon Musk, like a Thiel. These folks, and don't get me wrong, I mean, they bring enormous force, technological force for power purposes, and a lot of good comes from that activity. But where is the regulating apparatus? How do we strike that effective equipoise or balance between enhanced technologically and super empowered individual enhanced solutions to these compound problems, enhanced security and relative order and relative security, while at the same time not losing liberty.
Not
losing liberty.
Yeah. We could go on like this for a long time, you and I, friend. I know this is a conversation that could go on for a long time, but unfortunately, I'm sorry. We're out of time. Fortunately for you, because you're on the East Coast and you're probably missing dinner right now. So I appreciate, like usual, I really do appreciate you taking the time to share your ideas with us. It's always an insightful and engaging conversation. We hope you come back and do it again in the not just in future. Remember, for those who are watching, Ike teaches a couple of good courses in the MA Global Security on great power competition and winning without war. What's the name of your new course? I forgot the name of the new course.
Thinking Beyond War.
Thinking Beyond War.
Better conflict in a world disordered. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, once again, Ike, thank you so much for your thoughts and efforts, and thank you all for those who came. We hope to see you again soon at one of our events.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.